Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome back to Elena Tarot. I'm genuinely happy you're here with me today because I have to be honest with you. This reading made me pause before I even started recording. Sometimes I sit down with the cards and the message comes together naturally, but today I kept getting this feeling that there was something unusually specific waiting to come through. It felt less like I was preparing a general reading and more like I was sitting down to have a very personal conversation with someone who has been quietly carrying a question for quite some time. You may not even know exactly what question you're carrying, but there is something you've been wondering about, something you have felt rather than understood. And I think that is why you found your way here today. What makes this reading different is that the energy doesn't feel scattered, it feels focused. There is a particular person, a particular emotional situation, and a particular realization sitting right at the center of it. I don't want to tell you too much before we get there because I want you to experience the message as it unfolds. But I will say this. Somebody has been looking at you very differently lately. They may not have said anything. They may not have made some huge declaration. From the outside, you might even think absolutely nothing has changed. Yet internally, something has shifted in the way this person understands you, and I think that realization is going to surprise you because it has less to do with what you did for them and more to do with what your presence revealed about them. The guided material centers on a person recognizing unexpected depth, questioning old emotional patterns, and feeling that the connection carries more significance than ordinary attraction. The first thing I want you to understand is that I don't think this person expected you to affect them in the way you did. There are certain people we meet and immediately understand why we're attracted to them. Maybe they're beautiful, charming, funny, intelligent, confident, or simply have a personality that catches our attention. We can usually explain those things quite easily. But every once in a while, someone comes into our life and the attraction doesn't seem to have one obvious explanation. It's not just their appearance, their personality, or the things they say. It's the atmosphere around them. It's the feeling you have when you're with them. It's the strange familiarity that seems to exist before you've even known each other long enough to justify it. That's the kind of energy I feel around this connection, and I think this person has been trying to figure out why being around you feels so different. You may have noticed that this person sometimes seems very composed and then suddenly becomes difficult to read. One moment they appear completely comfortable, and the next there is a hesitation, a change in their tone, or a little bit of distance that makes you wonder what is actually happening inside their head. I don't necessarily feel that this means they are hiding something negative. In fact, I want to be careful about that because the energy doesn't feel sinister to me. It feels more like someone who is discovering that they have more emotional investment here than they originally intended. They are trying to understand their own reaction before they reveal it to anyone else. And when someone isn't accustomed to feeling this deeply, their first instinct isn't always to move closer. Sometimes they take a step back simply because they need to figure out what is happening. There is something else about you that seems to have caught them completely off guard. You don't appear to be someone who is satisfied with surface-level interaction. You might enjoy flirting, chemistry, attraction, and all of the fun things that come with meeting someone. But eventually, your curiosity goes deeper. You want to know who you're actually dealing with. You want to understand what shaped this person, what they've experienced, how they treat people when nobody is watching, how they behave when they're disappointed, how they handle responsibility, and whether the person they present to the world is actually the person they are underneath. That depth can be intimidating because not everybody is used to being observed beyond the version of themselves they intentionally present. And I think this person can feel that about you. They know you're paying attention. You may not interrogate them or ask endless questions, but they can sense that you notice things. You notice changes in behavior. You notice inconsistencies. You notice when someone's words and actions don't quite match. You notice the little details that other people might overlook. That makes it difficult for them to simply show you a polished version of themselves and assume you won't notice what sits underneath it. There is a feeling here that they know you are trying to understand them at a deeper level. And strangely enough, I don't think they dislike it. I think part of them actually wants to be understood, while another part is nervous about what you might discover once you really see them. That creates a very interesting dynamic because you are curious about them, but they are equally curious about you. They may wonder what goes on in your head when you're quiet. They may wonder what you're thinking when you look at them. They may wonder whether you feel the same intensity they feel. There could be moments when they deliberately watch your reactions because they are trying to determine whether this connection is as meaningful to you as it is to them. They may not ask directly because asking would require vulnerability. So instead, they observe. They listen to the tone of your voice. They notice whether you initiate. They pay attention to whether you seem emotionally available or whether you've started creating more distance. And that last part is especially important because I feel like your energy has changed. Perhaps you've become calmer. Perhaps you're no longer trying to make the connection happen. Maybe you're still interested, but you're not chasing an outcome. Maybe you have simply decided that if someone wants a meaningful place in your life, they need to show you that through their actions. Whatever form this change has taken, I think they have noticed it. You may not realize how visible your emotional growth has become, but to someone who has been paying attention, it can be very obvious. There is something very powerful about a person who stops trying to convince someone else to choose them. When you reach that point, your energy changes without you having to announce it. You don't become cold, you simply become more centered. You're still capable of love, affection, excitement, and vulnerability. But you're no longer willing to sacrifice your peace just to keep another person close. I think this person is beginning to understand that about you. They may have once assumed you would always be available to them emotionally, but now they aren't quite as certain. And that uncertainty has made them look at the connection differently. I keep getting this feeling of someone thinking, did I misunderstand this person? They may have underestimated how strong you actually are. Maybe your softness made them think you were easy to influence. Perhaps your patience gave them the impression that you would tolerate almost anything. Maybe because you were willing to communicate openly, they assumed they could take their time. But there is a difference between being patient and being passive, and I think they are beginning to understand that distinction. You can be compassionate and still have standards. You can love deeply and still walk away from something unhealthy. You can understand someone's struggles without taking responsibility for fixing them. That realization can be humbling for another person because it forces them to recognize that your kindness was never weakness. In fact, your kindness may have required more strength than they realized. You were able to remain soft without losing your identity. You were able to care without completely disappearing into the connection. And if this person has previously experienced relationships where emotional intensity became chaotic or where affection came with manipulation, your approach may have felt completely different. The source material similarly frames the connection around a calming, honest presence that causes the other person to reassess how they approach the relationship. Now, my beautiful souls, there is something I want to clarify because I don't want us to romanticize every difficult behavior. If somebody is inconsistent, unavailable, disrespectful, or unwilling to communicate, we shouldn't automatically label that behavior as proof that they're secretly overwhelmed by love. Sometimes inconsistency is simply inconsistency. Sometimes distance is simply distance. This reading is not asking you to ignore reality. What I'm seeing here is more subtle. I feel someone who has genuine internal conflict because their feelings are deeper than they anticipated. But the only way that matters to you is if they eventually learn how to communicate and act with greater maturity. That's the part I want you to watch. Not the hidden feeling, not the imagined conversation, not the possibility, the behavior. Because feelings can exist without creating a healthy relationship. A person can care deeply and still be emotionally unavailable. Someone can miss you and still not know how to treat you properly. Someone can recognize your value and still not be ready to offer what you need. So if this person is truly changing, You won't have to spend forever decoding them. Eventually, their behavior will become clearer. And I actually feel that is where this person is heading. They are reaching a point where they understand that thinking about you isn't enough. There is a desire to express something, explain something, or make some kind of gesture that communicates where they stand. I don't necessarily see one identical outcome for everybody watching, because each situation is different. For some of you, this could involve a sincere conversation. For others, it may begin with a simple message or a small attempt to reconnect. Some may experience a more serious development in an existing relationship. The common thread is the desire for greater clarity rather than endless ambiguity. The guided source also emphasizes movement toward clearer communication and a more concrete expression of commitment rather than leaving the connection in an undefined space. What makes this especially interesting is the pressure they feel around doing things properly. I don't mean pressure in a negative sense. It's more like they know that approaching you casually may no longer be enough. They sense that you expect something genuine, even if you have never written down a list of requirements or verbally explained every standard you have. Your energy speaks for you. You seem to carry yourself in a way that says, if you're going to enter my life, come with honesty. And that can make someone think twice before making a move, because they know they can't simply charm their way through the situation. I actually find that beautiful, because it suggests that they don't see you as someone they can approach carelessly. They understand that there is something to protect here. There is something worth handling with consideration. When a person begins thinking about how they need to approach you, rather than simply whether they can get your attention, that's a significant change. It means they have started thinking about your experience too. They're no longer viewing the situation entirely through their own desires. They're beginning to consider what you need from them in order to feel secure. And I think that's one of the reasons you may have affected this person so profoundly. You didn't simply make them feel something. You made them think about what kind of person they need to become if they want to hold on to that feeling in a healthy way. There is a big difference between wanting someone and being ready to show up for them. Attraction asks, how badly do I want this? Maturity asks, what am I willing to do differently so that this can actually work? This person seems to be moving from the first question toward the second. For some of you, this may be someone who has already been through a difficult emotional chapter. I don't want to assume exactly what happened because your circumstances will vary, but there is a strong sense of history around them. Something in their past taught them to be cautious. Perhaps they trusted someone and regretted it. Maybe they stayed too long in a relationship that drained them. Maybe they experienced betrayal, disappointment, or a situation where their emotions were used against them. Whatever happened, they learned to protect themselves. The difficulty is that protection can become a habit long after the original danger is gone. Then you appeared, and suddenly those old defenses weren't working quite as comfortably. That's why I feel this connection has been unsettling for them in a strange way. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are asking them to become more emotionally present than they have been accustomed to being. You may not even be consciously asking. Your presence itself is enough. When someone meets a person who values depth, honesty, and consistency, they eventually have to decide whether they can meet that standard. They can't hide behind charm forever. There is also a spiritual quality to this reading that I don't want to overlook. I'm not saying you should interpret every event as destiny or assume that a particular person is guaranteed to become your partner. What I mean is that this connection appears to have carried lessons that extend beyond ordinary attraction. It seems to have pushed both people toward greater self-awareness. There is a sense of timing around it, as though each person encountered the other at a point where something inside needed to change. The guided source similarly frames the connection as carrying a spiritual dimension that makes the other person question whether the experience represents a lesson, a reward, or a new stage of growth. That question may actually be sitting inside this person right now. They may wonder why you came into their life when you did. Why this particular person? Why this particular timing? Why did the connection feel so different from previous experiences? Why did it force them to confront things they had been avoiding? Those questions can be uncomfortable because they don't have simple answers. But sometimes a person enters our life at precisely the moment we're ready to learn something we weren't ready to learn before. I also think you have been learning something equally important. You've been learning not to confuse emotional intensity with emotional security. Those are not the same thing. A connection can be incredibly powerful and still require boundaries. You can feel a strong pull towards somebody while remaining discerning about whether they are actually good for you. You don't have to deny your intuition in order to protect yourself. And you don't have to abandon your standards in order to remain open to love. That balance is where I see you now. You are not becoming harder. You're becoming wiser. You're not losing your ability to feel. You're learning how to choose where those feelings belong. You're not closing your heart. You're learning how to give access to people who can handle what you offer. And I think this person can sense that difference. Maybe that's why they're more careful now. Maybe that's why they're taking longer than you'd like. Maybe that's why they're observing rather than immediately speaking. They're trying to figure out whether they can meet the level of sincerity they believe you expect. And I want you to understand something about that. Their hesitation doesn't automatically mean rejection. Sometimes hesitation is fear. Sometimes it is caution. Sometimes it is uncertainty. Sometimes it is a person trying to make a decision responsibly rather than impulsively. But again, don't make their hesitation your permanent waiting room. Give people room to process, but don't give them unlimited time to keep you suspended in uncertainty. If they genuinely want to be part of your life, eventually there has to be movement. There has to be communication. There has to be effort. There has to be some indication that the internal realization is becoming an external choice. That's how you'll know the difference between someone who simply feels something and someone who is prepared to build something. And I think that distinction will become increasingly important in the coming chapter. There is another thing I'm picking up around this person, and it's almost like they're afraid of making the wrong move. They don't want to approach you and then disappoint you. They don't want to promise something they cannot deliver. They don't want to repeat a previous pattern. They may be thinking much more carefully about consequences than you realize. Again, this doesn't excuse inaction forever, but it does explain why the energy feels cautious rather than reckless. They may even be trying to improve certain areas of their life before they come toward you. Perhaps they're working on finances, career, family responsibilities, emotional stability, or simply getting themselves into a better mental space. I wouldn't tell you to assume one specific circumstance, but the overall energy feels like preparation. They want to feel more capable of showing up properly before they reveal the depth of what they're carrying. And that's another reason this reading feels unusual. This doesn't feel like somebody simply wanting attention. It feels like somebody thinking about responsibility. There is a difference. When someone only wants attention, they usually focus on how you make them feel. When someone is seriously considering you, they start thinking about how their actions affect you. They begin asking whether they can be dependable, whether they can communicate properly, whether they can make room for you, and whether their current life is compatible with what they want. That's the kind of thought process I sense developing here. My beautiful souls, if you're listening and you're thinking, Elena, I know exactly who this is, then take a breath and don't immediately start imagining the ending. Let the story unfold. Sometimes we become so excited when a reading resonates that we rush mentally into the future. We imagine the conversation, the reunion, the confession, the relationship, the happy ending. And suddenly, we're emotionally living inside something that hasn't happened yet. I don't want that for you. Stay present. Let reality meet you where you are. If this person reaches out, you don't have to decide everything in one conversation. If they express feelings, you don't have to immediately promise anything. If they apologize, you can listen without automatically forgetting what happened. If they say they have changed, you can allow them the opportunity to demonstrate that change. Give yourself time to observe. You don't have to rush simply because someone else has finally become ready. That is part of your power. You get to choose too. And I think that may be one of the biggest surprises in this entire reading. You may have entered this situation believing that the other person held all the power because they were the one who seemed more distant or uncertain. But as you grow, you realize that their uncertainty does not determine your worth. Their hesitation does not define your future. Their decision is only one part of the story. You have your own decision to make about what kind of relationship, behavior, and emotional environment you are willing to accept. That's a very different mindset from waiting to be chosen. And I think they can feel that. They may sense that if they want to come toward you now, they need to approach you with more substance. The old version of the connection may not be enough anymore. You have changed the standard simply by becoming clearer about yourself. This person may also be wondering whether you still have feelings for them. They may question whether the door is open. They might look for subtle clues because asking directly feels risky. If you've been quieter lately, that silence may have made them even more curious. They may wonder whether you're moving on, whether someone else has entered your life, or whether you simply stopped expecting anything from them. Again, these are possibilities rather than promises, but the underlying theme is uncertainty about your current emotional position. And that uncertainty is revealing something important. They finally understand that they cannot assume access to you. They may have taken your presence for granted before. They may not anymore. The more they recognize that, the more seriously they seem to be considering what they want. This is where I feel a subtle but meaningful change. Instead of asking, how can I get closer to this person? They're beginning to ask, what would I need to bring into this person's life if I want them to trust me? That is a much more mature question. It moves away from desire and toward responsibility. And that is exactly the kind of internal shift I would want to see before encouraging you to reopen a door. Because chemistry is easy. Consistency is harder. Words are easy. Character takes time. An apology can happen in one afternoon. Rebuilding trust can take months. A person can say they miss you. Showing that they are capable of loving you in a healthy way is something they have to demonstrate repeatedly. So let this person show you. You don't have to chase the evidence. You don't have to interrogate them. You don't have to become their therapist. You don't have to explain what they should already understand. Simply observe. If their intentions are genuine, you'll notice. If they are only lonely, you'll notice. If they're seeking comfort, you'll notice. If they are ready for something meaningful, you'll notice that too. And I think your intuition is already becoming much sharper about this. You've probably learned through experience that your body tells you things before your mind catches up. You might notice tension around one person and peace around another. You might feel energized after a conversation or completely drained. You might feel like you have to perform with one person but can simply exist with another. These sensations matter. They don't tell you everything, but they give you information. So don't ignore your own experience just because someone says the right words. Listen to how you feel around their actions. That's where your answer will come from. My beautiful souls, we're also reaching a point where I feel you are being asked to release the need to know exactly when something will happen. I know that's difficult. When we care about a situation, we naturally want timing. We want dates. We want certainty. We want to know whether it's tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. But sometimes focusing too heavily on timing takes us away from the actual lesson. Instead of living our life, we're constantly checking the calendar for someone else's decision. Now, my beautiful souls, if you've stayed with me this far and this message has genuinely resonated with you, I would love for you to subscribe to Elena Tarot. I don't want you subscribing because you feel pressured by a dramatic reading. Subscribe because you enjoy these conversations, because something here helps you reflect, or because you simply like spending a little time with me when you need a different perspective. And if you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments what you have been sensing lately. Sometimes someone else's comment becomes the exact thing another viewer needed to read that day. Now let's come back to the person at the center of this reading, because I don't think their story ends with simply realizing that they care. There is a deeper question. What are they going to do with that realization? That is where their maturity will be tested. They may have spent a long time thinking about you. They may have analyzed the connection. They may have replayed conversations. They may have wondered whether you feel the same way. They may have even regretted certain decisions. But eventually, thoughts need somewhere to go. If they truly want something different, they will have to behave differently. I see potential for communication here, but I want you to keep your expectations grounded. It may begin very simply. A message that seems ordinary, a question about your life, a small reference to something you once shared, a conversation that starts casually but slowly becomes more meaningful. Don't underestimate small beginnings, but don't turn them into conclusions either. Let the interaction develop naturally. If they open up, listen. If they explain themselves, hear them. If they apologize, notice whether accountability accompanies the apology. If they express feelings, give yourself time to process them. You don't have to respond from shock. You don't have to respond from old emotions. You can respond from the person you are today. And I think that is going to make a huge difference. Because the person they knew before may have responded immediately from the heart. The person you are becoming knows how to let the heart speak while allowing the mind to participate too. That balance is maturity, and it protects your softness. I also feel that some of you are going to experience a completely different outcome from what you expected. You may have spent a long time assuming that the biggest reward would be getting this person back. But when the situation finally becomes clear, you may realize that what you actually wanted was understanding. You wanted to know that you weren't imagining the connection. You wanted confirmation that your experience had meaning. You wanted to understand why it affected you so deeply. And sometimes that understanding is the closure we were actually searching for. Maybe the person returns. Maybe they don't. Maybe the relationship develops. Maybe it becomes a lesson that remains meaningful without becoming permanent. Life doesn't always give us the ending we imagined, but that doesn't mean it gives us nothing. Sometimes it gives us ourselves back, and that's priceless. Looking at your energy, I think you're moving toward a period where you will be much less willing to compromise your emotional standards. You're learning that love should feel safe enough to breathe. You shouldn't have to constantly decode someone's mood. You shouldn't have to wonder whether you're asking for too much because you want basic respect. You shouldn't have to earn consistency by becoming smaller. The right kind of connection will allow you to remain yourself. That's what I want you to remember. Don't become a version of yourself that is easier for someone else to love. Become the version of yourself that you respect. If somebody meets you there, beautiful. If they don't, keep going. Because the life waiting for you is much bigger than one person's ability to recognize your value. My beautiful souls, as we bring this reading toward the end, I want to return to the strange feeling I had when I first sat down to record this. I couldn't shake the sense that someone watching would hear something today that changes the way they have been looking at a situation. Maybe it will be a realization about another person. Maybe it will be something about your own behavior. Maybe you'll finally understand why a certain connection affected you so strongly. Or perhaps you'll recognize that you've been waiting for an answer that you already carried inside yourself. Whatever that realization is, don't be afraid of it. Clarity can be emotional. Sometimes clarity means admitting you still care. Sometimes it means admitting you're tired. Sometimes it means accepting that somebody wasn't ready. Sometimes it means recognizing that they are finally becoming ready. Sometimes it means opening a door. Sometimes it means closing one. The important thing is that the decision comes from truth rather than fear. And I think that is the real heart of today's message. You don't have to chase what is meant for you. You don't have to force somebody to recognize you. You don't have to manipulate circumstances. You don't have to perform. You don't have to become mysterious just to make someone curious. Your authenticity is enough. Your boundaries are enough. Your heart is enough. And the people who are genuinely capable of meeting you will appreciate those qualities rather than asking you to abandon them. So if there is someone who has been quietly trying to understand why you affected them so deeply, let them have their realization. If they need time to process what they feel, let them process it. If they decide to communicate, allow their actions to speak. But while they are figuring themselves out, you keep living your life. Don't sit beside the door waiting for somebody to knock. Build the house you want to live in. Fill it with peace. Fill it with laughter. Fill it with meaningful people. Fill it with work you're proud of. Fill it with experiences that remind you how much life exists outside one relationship. Then, if somebody walks through that door, they aren't entering an empty life. They're entering a life that is already full. And that is the kind of love you deserve. My beautiful souls, thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for listening, for trusting me with your energy, and for making Elena Tarot such a warm community. And please, once again, keep my father in your prayers. Your kindness has meant so much to me during this difficult period, and I truly carry those beautiful messages in my heart. Remember, take what resonates and leave what doesn't. You don't have to force a message to fit your life. Your intuition knows what belongs to you. And if today's reading gave you even one moment of clarity, one moment of comfort, or one reason to look at yourself with a little more kindness, then I'm grateful that we found each other today. Take care of yourself, my beautiful souls. Protect your peace, trust your intuition, and don't be afraid of the person you're becoming. Sometimes the most unexpected message isn't about someone coming toward you at all. Sometimes it is the realization that you have already become the person you were waiting for. I'll see you in the next reading.